everyone. If you're just tuning in, you are listening to Level Up Nation, and I am your host, Stacey Freer with the Dustin Pritchard Real Estate Team, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Dustin Pritchard. How you doing?
And today on our panel, we have a very special guest, University Professor Marvin Ryder, and you actually are a professor of...
Well, I teach marketing and entrepreneurship at the DeGroot School of Business, but I also answer questions about the general economy. And so people who tuning in might recognize me from TV or on radio. I seem to be getting lots of economic questions these days.
Well, there must be something going on that, is top of mind.
Yeah, you probably heard about the whole problem with the Kardashians and how they've affected the economy. So that's keeping me pretty busy these days to keep track of those.
Terrible situation, those Kardashians.
Yeah, I know. Without further ado, though, we do want to ask you some questions. So I think in tying into marketing and advertising, because in that profession, you study heavily psychographics, demographics, the shifts in the market, obviously the 4 Ps of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. So you have to have a good grasp on micro and macroeconomics. So it's not really out of your wheelhouse to discuss something.
Sure, and this time it's a little more focused, obviously. The COVID crisis has put a real hook into the entire economy. Basically, the government said the best way for us to get through this is to shelter in place. So if you're not an essential business, if it's not absolutely critical for you to be at your job, stay home. And stay home probably for what will turn out to be 8 to 10 weeks. No time in the world's history, at no time in the world's history have we ever tried to shut down an economy for 10 weeks and then turn it back on again. So, of course, governments around the world are scrambling to give people supports. Here in Canada, we have the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, we have the wage subsidy, we have a rental subsidy going on. None of these existed before. None of them are going to exist in the future. They are simply to bridge us to that time we can get the economy going. And as I'm talking to you today, we are getting closer to restarting that economy. But what is certainly beginning to appear quite large is that it's not going to be like a light switch. It's going to be more like a dimmer switch rather than just on off. It'll be let's open this much and then monitor, see what happens. Let's open a little bit more, see what happens. And by the way, we'll do that differently in different areas. So for instance, Saskatchewan, which has a relatively low population density, will probably open up more things before the greater Hamilton and Toronto area do, given our population density. We think, all things being equal, that most of the economy is going to start getting back to normal probably by the end of June, early July. But I'm talking to you at the end of April. That still seems like a long ways off. And so we've got to continue to ask people to be really patient.
Absolutely. And it's funny because kind of tagging on to the Kardashian logic, I sort of picture it as a big country wave. Like province by province, city by city, everyone gets to stand up and do their wave. Is essentially what happens. Not everybody standing up and going back to work at the same time. It will literally happen as a domino effect.
And in fact, I think, again, if we're just sharing this with people, the one thing I do want to make sure everyone has expectations about is we may go a couple of steps forward and then have to go one back if we start doing it a little too quickly or we pick a wrong industry. To give you an example of an industry that won't come back quickly, the airline industry, or if I'm a sporting event, an arena, there's no good way to social distance people there. Yes, you can wear some gloves. Yes, you can wear some masks, but we're all going to be tight together. That's not where the opening is going to start. A golf course. If you played golf with me, I'd never see you most of the time because I'm in the woods and you're down the middle of the fairway. You know, the social distancing is no problem there. So some industries can come back faster. Some will be towards the end of this, but we will have to find a way to get every industry working. And Stacey, if you don't mind, let me just segue a bit to your industry. You know, if you were to look at the prime interest rates going on in Canada today, they have never been this low at any time in this country's history. We're talking about more than 150 years. And normally, when we have really low interest rates, guess what happens to real estate? It gets exploding. the number of people buying, the prices, the bidding wars, magic happens, and yet none of that is happening today. And the reason is we have to have the other half of the equation. So we have relatively cheap money, but we have to have consumer confidence. And for people to make probably the single biggest investment of their lives, that's their home, or perhaps a second home, they've got to have confidence that they can carry that mortgage for 15, 20, 25 years. And given that unemployment in Canada today is probably running between 15 and 20%, if you're not unemployed, you probably know somebody who is. That really hurts your confidence. It will come back, however, and I don't think, I'm speaking of the real estate market here, I don't think you should all tuck your tail between your legs and, oh my God, the world is falling. It is falling, but just temporarily. And I think once we can begin to get people back in, and there is no second wave, and this was a one-time thing, probably by the third quarter, and certainly the fourth quarter of this year, 2020, the housing market will start to heat up. One other bit of warning, however, is then once it does start to heat up, you may see the Bank of Canada increase interest rates marginally, because they still want to keep things, they want a certain amount of heat, but they don't want too much heat. So a little bit for a while. I think by the end of this year, interest rates will probably be higher than they are right now, because we won't need to have them so artificially low, but they'll still be, compared to the history of Canada, very, very low.
Now, one of the things that I think was very interesting is that you've projected sort of a V in the market, or I guess a V that way, where we see a spike and a decline. Did you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Well, a lot of people are wondering, how is this recovery going to go? Is it a V shape, meaning we went down suddenly and then we're going to go back up suddenly, or is it more of a U shape where it goes up more slowly and gets there? And to be candid, I have to say, we don't know. We've never tried this before, not just in Canada, but around the world. So we have no precedent. The best I could give you would be to talk about 1918, 102 years ago. I was only 7 at the time, so I don't remember a lot about 1918.
It looks fantastic.
That was the last time we tried some social distancing. But again, the world is a different place today, significantly different. So we just don't know. My feeling is, and it's only a feeling, I can't prove this to you at all, is that when I tell people you cannot do something, so if I say to you, you cannot go to a restaurant or you cannot go buy a new pair of shoes, the one thing you now desperately want to do more than anything else is go to a restaurant or buy a new pair of shoes. So if I tell people that you can't be buying homes, that the market's not steady, I think there will be some pent-up demand, and that's why I think it's going to be more V-shaped, that it'll bounce back relatively quickly. Think 3 to 6 months, we could be back. In fact, I could say by April of 2021, people might wonder what all the fuss was about, that the economy may have come back that much in just a year. But that all depends upon this consumer confidence, and also no second wave. If we start to get confidence and then suddenly we have to do this all over again and shut down, that's going to really destroy things for people. So we've got to have a good recovery without any more COVID, and then I think we'll get back to normal pretty quick.
That's awesome. Hey, Justin, you had a couple questions that you wanted to ask Marvin, correct?
Yeah, I did actually. There's a couple things. Like right now, we're at the end of April, so obviously the April numbers are just about to come out, which is super awesome. So I just wanted to ask you, as far as the real estate industry, and your predictions, like what are your predictions of what are the numbers going to look like? What do you think the numbers are going to look like as far as April?
Yeah, April will be the worst month of the year, and I can't sugarcoat that. This will be the worst month for unemployment. I think when you hear the numbers, there's normally the first Friday of the month, but since Friday is May the 1st, it'll be most likely around the 5th we'll get these numbers. I think you'll hear 15 to 20% unemployment. We haven't seen numbers like that since the Great Depression, but the difference is it was not a banking or a stock market thing that failed that caused that unemployment. It's something medical, and also something we hope is going to be short term. In terms of the housing market, oddly enough, I think prices will have stayed pretty okay. I don't think you'll see a big fallback in prices, maybe 2 or 3%, 4%, but it'll be the volume. people are not interested in buying properties. People are not interested in selling properties. They are truly just taking shelter at home. So I don't think from your industry standpoint, this will be the worst month. And by the way, putting my Swami hat on and looking at May's not going to be much better either. In Ontario anyway, I think the earliest you can begin to see this market reopen is probably Tuesday, May 19th, the day after the long weekend. We may start to see things crack open then. It'll follow on Monday, June the 1st, I think that is, or May 31st. You'll see some more cracking open, but May will also be a bad month. So April, May, two of the worst months of the year. And from an income standpoint, real estate agents really taking a hit in the pocketbook. But I think once we get to June and July, and assuming no second wave, things will look a lot better.
You know what? I agree with you. Sorry, Stacey. I agree with you 100% because what we're seeing across the board is that the prices have not softened greatly. Only in certain hotspot areas across the market where they may have been somewhat artificially inflated for whatever reason. There's softening, obviously, but for the most part, values have stayed the same, which is really fantastic. And then we've also got the upward pressure from the low interest rates. The buyers were still there, the low inventory. Like we're not seeing as many multiple offers, but we just saw, like I just did a deal. I was just working with a client yesterday, interested in a property, and this property sold in a couple of days, in the space of about 4 days, 6 offers still in today's market. And they had priced it at, a comparable rate. So now they've obviously been able to sell for a little bit over asking price, which is pretty good.
Well, Dustin, in your industry that the very best properties, there's always a market for the very best properties or well-positioned properties, no matter what the economy is doing. I'm speaking to you from Hamilton, so I'm not as tuned into the Toronto industry. I would feel there's a little softness in the condo industry at this point, in part because some people buy condos in Toronto to turn them into Airbnb locations. And of course, nobody is traveling. Airbnb is not a happy thing. Rentals are not as strong as they were. So I would think there's a little softness in the condo market in Toronto, but in the greater Hamilton, Burlington area, condos are not as proportionately as big a chunk of that market as just regular housing. And I don't think that's going to be as bad. Now, the other question mark turning from residential is commercial real estate. And obviously, we've had a whole lot of businesses that have had to go into hibernation mode. They've had a hard time paying their rent. So we've had some landlords who've been sympathetic. We've also seen a government program that, although it has not sent money, has promised money to help cover some of these rents for the months of April, May, and June. There's also the $40,000 loan, interest-free loan, with 25% of it being forgivable, just to help cover fixed costs for some small businesses. Again, that money hasn't really begun to flow just yet. So, I think we will hear about some businesses failing. Unfortunately, these would have been businesses that were just barely above the water before this, probably won't be able to survive. And remember that on commercial real estate, particularly on the retail side, we still haven't really absorbed all the space that was freed up when Zellers, Target, and Sears went under. So, I think commercial real estate will be okay this year. I think residential will get hotter, but I think commercial will be okay, but probably still not bouncing back. And then the other mystery question here is for larger corporations that rent space in office towers or in these sort of commercial complexes, they've sent many of their workers home and said, work from home, telework, what have you. As an interim strategy, will they find that works so well that becomes a new part of their real strategy? And will they then downsize their office space requirements? Far too early to tell any of that at this point. But if I'm looking into my crystal ball, I see residential coming back real fast. Commercial, there are question marks out there.
Now, sorry, Justin, I wanted to jump in here. So you're talking a little bit about Burlington, Hamilton, and then Toronto market. Well, one thing that is popularly known, I would say, in the marketing industry is that London has always been a test market. London bounced back relatively quickly in 2008, and here we're still seeing a lot of activity. And even though we're down about 75%, I think that London will bounce back again relatively quicker than the Burlington, Toronto market. Do you foresee any changes within that, or?
Well, when you look at Ontario and you look at its urban centers, there are some that are highly interconnected, and that's that Greater Toronto, Hamilton area. You really can't tell where Burlington ends and Oakville begins and Mississauga. They're a megalopolis, as we like to call it. But if you go about an hour outside, you get another little island, and that's Kitchener-Waterloo, Guelph. That tends to be an island. Then you go another hour down the road, you get into the London, Ontario area. You go another hour down the road, you got Chatham, and then you go down to Sarnia and Windsor. Each of those are separate, and therefore they behave a little differently. In the case of Windsor, often there's a little spillover from how is Detroit doing. That can affect Windsor more than how is Toronto doing. If you go the opposite direction, you have to get around past Oshawa. You have to start looking at Belleville or Brockville, and certainly Ottawa is its own little island. But proportionately, in terms of the entire Ontario market, the whole market kind of lives and dies by what the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area does, because that's just where the big volumes are. But I think some of those other areas will bounce back. And when you think of London, Ontario, when you think of Guelph, when you think of Kitchener-Waterloo, what do you think of? They're university towns to a great extent. So education and healthcare are two of the biggest drivers, and those are not as affected by COVID-19. I teach at a university. I have not lost my job. I continue to be paid on a regular basis. In fact, that's one of the bright spots of having the public sector as one of your major employers. They don't tend to be as affected by these economic upturns and downturns. Windsor, on the other hand, still does have a university and a wonderful hospital, but there is more manufacturing in that area. Oshawa has more manufacturing, and clearly that has taken a bit of a hit through all of this as well. So I don't think they'll all come back at the same rate, but I think, again, in just a few months, wherever you're talking about residential real estate, things will look up. You just can't ignore these low interest rates. And frankly, the banks, I know you're not crying for the banks, and the banks aren't losing tons of money, but they're in the business of lending money. They only make money if they lend it and generate interest on this. So I think, again, coming out of this, probably not in May, but in June and July, you may see some, for lack of a better term, sales at the banks where they give you some really low interest rates that are going to be hard for some people who are thinking about getting into the market to ignore.
That's perfect. Dustin, did you have a couple more questions you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I did. I've been watching segments of the real estate market. You'd mentioned the commercial, that you think commercial is going to be okay, but remain somewhat soft, and residential going through the roof. What do you think about the new build market? I've been hearing and seeing a lot of stats coming out of the new builds that it doesn't seem to have been affected as much as the residential resale.
Yeah, and I must admit, I don't keep right on the leading edge of government policy, but I believe that much construction was able to continue on during the COVID crisis, partly because construction workers tend to be fairly socially distanced. If I'm putting the shingles on a roof, I'm not interacting with the guy who's doing the bathroom or the kitchen install, and then I'm not working with the person who's doing the walls or the flooring. So I think that has not taken a big hit. But I again imagine it has slowed down because there's no point building a lot of product if you don't feel you can sell it. And also keep in mind that construction workers in the home building business tend to be a little younger, so they may have had children who were sent home from school. Someone had to take care of them. It might not necessarily be the female spouse. Her job might be as a nurse, so she's required. Maybe it's the construction worker who had to shelter at home. So I think there's been a bit of retarding in that market, but nothing that I would see as permanent. I think, again, once we get the all clear, and in fact, in that first wave of businesses that the government allows to restart, I would not be surprised to see home construction, as I joked about the golf course, because it is so easily to social distance there.
I'm sorry, I have to joke around about the golf course too, because as a female, I'm gonna say this, and there's gonna be women out there hating me, but I am that female that bottlenecks everybody. I'm very new to golf, love it, but it takes me a few swings to get my drive out. So you would be.
No, we're clearly talking about real estate, but I should say that what's also happening right now, there are some small business people who are really itching to reopen, and in their mind, they think they're probably not going to be in that first wave. But what they're trying to do is contact their MPPs and say, here are some things that we can do to create security for consumers Could you then allow us to open in that first wave? A great example would be a nail salon, getting your nails done, getting a manicure, or getting your hair done. That's not a high priority item. And normally we think, well, how do you social distance? I got to touch your hair to cut your hair. I got to touch your nails to do your nails. But through a combination of masks and face shields and gloves, they may very well be able to demonstrate to the government that they can be socially responsible and be allowed in that first wave. But that's going to be a judgment call of the government. So you may see a few surprises, for lack of a better term, let's call them experiments by the government in that first wave of businesses. They may not all be as logical as you might think.
I hope pet groomers come back. My poor dog.
My poor dog. She looks great. Emily's done a great job grooming Tao, but I hear you. I hear you 100%. Marvin, I can't help but take a look at the market and look at the stats, and just like a stock ticker, and looking at the market in general and seeing, especially in real estate, that it just feels very similar to the 2008 crisis, where we saw almost half of the real estate industry like just stop for almost 6 months, and then goes almost not vertically down, but really, really fast down, and then almost just as fast and actually faster rebound right back up to record highs. Is this somewhat similar? Different reasons.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I'm talking about.
let me say yes to your question, but also let me point out there was regional variation. So back in 2008-9, the epicenter of that crisis was 4 states in the United States: Florida, California, Nevada, and Arizona. I visited those areas at that time, and I saw whole subdivisions sitting empty. People had bought homes with the barest minimum down. They saw the price of the home decline dramatically, and they just truly walked away, just left the front door open and walked away and said, hey, bank, you deal with it. We never had that kind of an issue in Canada, but it was when the United States catches a cold, we start to cough kind of a syndrome. So we were able to bounce back much more quickly. It took those 4 states 2 to 3 years to bounce back, and I was keeping an eye on those to see. So it depends where you are, and I think the same thing will happen here with COVID-19. I think Canada in the real estate market will come back fairly quickly because there is nothing systemic to the real estate that has caused this problem. You aren't the cause of COVID-19. You're not the cure of COVID-19. It wasn't bad loans or these funny securities that were put together in 2008 that caused the crisis. So it really just boils down to, when will consumers feel confident to step out of their homes and start resuming their lives as normal? And I don't think it'll be equal. And I think many people will watch some neighbors who are, we'll call them trailblazers. And when nothing bad happens to them, well, okay, if they can go out, I can go out. Hey, they bought a home. Well, I guess I can buy a home. And so I think it will come back fairly quickly. But it is different than 2008-9 because underlying that, there were some real economic problems, primarily in the United States, that were causing this. This is caused by a disease which is totally unrelated to the real estate market.
But the market should look somewhat similar. So what I'm looking for is that consumer confidence. A lot of people are scared. A lot of people are worried, right? So if you take away the health concerns and obviously, stay safe, stay at home, social distance and all that kind of stuff. But I know that a lot of people are very, very concerned about the economic repercussions that are coming from this, especially small business owners, people that are staying at home, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just, I was just looking for the parallels between that crisis and this crisis, because it feels similar when I'm looking at a graph, and I'm just looking at a graph and saying, okay, it's going down, it's going up. It just feels the same.
Right. Well, both crises had the fear of the unknown driving it. And one of the reasons why you saw the stock market tank the way it did in March, it's actually come back in April a little bit, is because in March, they were only imagining the worst possible case scenarios. Oh my gosh, what if unemployment hits 50%? Oh my gosh, what if this? And in that stock trading world, they have to go down the road of what's the worst case scenario. Then as the scenario evolves, and you can say, oh, wait a minute, no, 50% is not in the cards. It may be 20%, but oh, well, that's a lot better than what I was imagining. And suddenly things start to come back. And the same thing goes with individuals' economic concerns. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my job, you're losing the job. What's the government going to do for me? well, I don't know if that $2,000 benefit's going to help. I don't know if that's going to help the kids go to university. I don't know. But as the supports become real, and as the money begins to flow, and as you begin to see how other parts of the world, for instance, credit card companies have said, if you're in trouble, tell us, we'll take your interest rate down to 10% on the credit card. As you begin to see those become reality, you're no longer dealing with the imagination, the boogeyman, if you will, in your imagination. You're dealing with the reality, and that helps bring back confidence fairly quickly. But again, all of what I'm saying to you presupposes no second wave of COVID. And I don't mean to harp on this, but back in 1918, it was not the first wave of the Spanish flu that did the big damage. It was actually the second wave. Too prematurely, people said it had passed, let's get out, let's have fun. And in that fall, there was this second wave. This is something we desperately do not want to have. So I'll tell you quickly on that point, two things. One, obviously, is the government's going to take care in terms of its reopening to not reopen too quickly. But I can also tell you that if there are pockets of COVID-19 that appear in the fall, I guarantee you the world is going to treat them differently. For instance, this time when you were coming back from China, we said, would you just mind self-quarantining? You'll go home, take care of yourself. And of course, we found all kinds of people either didn't do that or on their way home to self-quarantine, stopped at the grocery store, stopped here, stopped there, got some gas. No. So I think next time around, if there's a hot spot and you come back to this country from that hot spot, we're going to send you someplace and lock you into a quarantine. And that way we can protect everybody else.
Yeah, no, and you know what? That's the thing. I think that makes the most sense too, because again, we were polite and we asked nicely, as most Canadians do. And then when people don't listen, then you have to take it to the next level. Gentlemen, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Marvin, for being on the show. We are running a little bit low on time here. Do you guys have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, nothing specifically on my side. I do these things to try to show how McMaster connects to the community, and that's why you might see me on TV or hear me on the radio. And we're always here to try to offer advice. Probably in the weeks ahead, we'll have a couple of sessions with the Burlington Chamber of Commerce where people can just call in with their questions, and a little group of us will try to answer them to help out. Because we realize there's this uncertainty. Unfortunately, our crystal balls really aren't much clearer than anybody else's crystal balls, and we're not the ones setting government policy, but we can help you interpret some of those things as it goes.
That's perfect. And you did want to give it, I wanted to give a shout out as well to the community program that you do have at McMaster, the business program. You guys are doing wonderful, wonderful things. And I wanted to thank you again so much for being on Level Up Nation. I mean, hopefully, knock on wood, there isn't a second wave, but if there is, I would love to have you back on. Dustin, do you have any closing remarks?
No, you know what? I just wanted to add my gratitude as well. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I think it's incredibly important for us to engage with professionals like yourself that have the experience and the knowledge and access to information to be able to spread the word and educate the public and educate people from many different perspectives, especially about as things are recovering, as people are starting to talk about recovery. This isn't a free license to go out there and do the things that you were doing 2 months ago. This is certainly not that, because we do not want a second wave. We are still essential services as far as real estate, but that can go away really darn fast if we're not being responsible as well, right? So we need to be very responsible and work with our governments to make sure that we're not participating in contributing to a second wave.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks again for all of you guys tuning in. We talked a little bit about the real estate market and what's going on in the economy. You guys have been listening to Level Up Nation with our special guest today, Marvin Ryder from the University of McMaster, as well as my co-host, Dustin Pritchard. Thank you guys, and we'll see you again next time.
Will do.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.